Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux, here with a review for Grave of the Fireflies. This is the next of my Studio Ghibli lineup, and like I talked about last week with My Neighbor Totoro, this was designed as part of a tandem double feature, because Grave of the Fireflies is considered more of a traditional film, and at the time, My Neighbor Totoro was kind of viewed as this experimental film, a structureless movie that doesn't operate like a traditional children's film. And so they decided to pair the two together and had that one play after this movie, which is wild because I can't imagine watching any movie after this film. It really immerses you in genuine grief on a scale that I haven't experienced outside of when I've had to truly grieve in my real life. The way that Isao Takahata taps into that and accesses that grief is stunning. This movie's a genuine masterpiece. I'm going to just put it on Front Street. I think this is the best film Studio Ghibli has ever produced and probably will ever produce. It is the bravest film. It is one of the most effective anti-war movies, even though Takahata swears it's not anti-war, or not only just an anti-war film. But the way with which it depicts its subject makes that anti-war sentiment really hold strong, because unlike most anti-war movies, they depict war with some kind of warrior. This is a film void of any military characters, truly. It is from the perspective of the citizens, the survivors, the people that are just trying to get on with the day-to-day as this horrible event is happening around them. And the confrontation in the opening line of dialogue that your main character has died and is a child, you know that you're going to watch something heavy and you expect sadness. But this goes so far beyond sadness. This is an immersion in grief. Being told that he's going to die right from the offset is another brave choice. And I feel like it's strange to me that My Neighbor Totoro, given how history has played out with Studio Ghibli and Totoro becoming the mascot of the studio and one of the most recognizable pieces of Japanese animation, full stop, it's wild to me that that was considered the experimental film and that this was more the traditional animated film. This is a movie void of any kind of sensationalism. It is a true depiction of war, or what the happenings of war around regular people. Like, you have bombs going off, but there's no booms, there's no nothing like going on with the sound and the great sonic crashes or anything like that. It's like this little thud of this bomb that spreads fire, and that fire suddenly spreads through the city. And seeing what happens to the city after the fact and how that affects the characters' mothers, or mother and father, and stuff like that. The father who's off at war, probably presumed by the end of the piece dead. And the just struggling to hold on to something. And watching these kids, similar fashion to My Neighbor Totoro, break into everyday escapism just to get through the day-to-day, knowing where this story is going from the opening line is heart-wrenching. And to the point where it's beyond sadness. This is something that's far beyond that. As I say, it is grief. Also, watching the film, I think Setsuko is the girl's name. Watching this film when you have a daughter the same age as that little girl is so much harder. Oh my god. Like, I've seen this movie before, and I've always thought that it was a masterpiece. But when you can tether an actual child to it, it's so much harder to watch. And yet there's a beauty to every single frame, to every single moment, no matter how heart-wrenching, how sad, how disturbing that everything is. And watching people make choices that feel so right in the moment, but can't end well, is so hard. And especially if you're watching, having seen it all the way through once, you know the exact moments that everything happens. And you have this need and want to condemn, like, say, the aunt character, who is constantly just, like, poking little barbs into these kids for being extra mouths for her to feed, but looking at the true reality of the situation, there are extra mouths for her to feed, and she's barely scraping by. And it's just remarkable how effective this film is in delivering its messaging, whether intentional or not by the filmmaker. It's stunning. The little girl in it is so believable, so real. There's an authenticity to every single beat in the film, right down to, like, the aunt is licking rice off of her hand, and the way the kid just plays. And then when the kid is sick, my daughter, that same 3-year-old, was very, very sick at one point last year, and we had to take her to the hospital because it got pretty bad. But when you see her shutting down throughout this film, it just echoed the reality of, I saw something similar to that happening with my own kid last year, and it's just, it's, oh my god, heart-wrenching when you are confronted with this and you are left to just watch voyeuristically, unable to do anything. As I say, the film is void of sensationalism. It's trying to depict everything as extremely naturally and realistically as possible, except for in 1 or 2 moments that bookend the film. And those moments are so strong and so evocative of every emotion. It's full cathartic release when you get to the end of this film. And you're left with a numbness that you've experienced something truly magical in a film landscape, while also being confronted with the reality that this happens every day, even still to this day, around the world. And this is a story that we haven't learned the lesson from, and that what's happening with these kids is happening elsewhere. And it's just that like staring down the barrel of a gun aspect this film has is truly palpable. I remember showing this film to a teacher of mine in high school back in 2003, I want to say. I was taking a class called Our World, or a humanities kind of class, and we were discussing war. And I told him about this film and how effective it was. It piqued his interest, so I let him borrow it. And he returned it to me a couple of days later, feeling that he had experienced something like truly, genuinely strong with that film, but he was afraid he could never show it in his class because of the rawness of the film. There's no artifice, even though it's animated. There's nothing artificial about what you are being presented with. And he didn't feel comfortable ever showing that to a classroom, even though he couldn't stop thinking about it after he watched it. I graduated like a year or two later. I don't know if he ever worked it into his curriculum. I often wondered that whenever I've revisited this film. But there's a beauty to the film throughout the film, and how he captures these voices of these two kids so realistically, and it's both of them. that I really quite appreciate and really quite like. It's filled with little human moments, little touches that elevate everything so perfectly. It's really truly one of the 10 best movies I have ever watched. Yet it's one of those movies that is so hard to ever revisit because of its subject matter and the realistic way with which it goes about everything. But yeah, I love this film. Shortly after watching it this time around, I was like, I had heard there was a live action version of this film, which means that somebody on this planet, some producer or something, was like, hey, what if Grave of the Fireflies, but live action? So I decided to check that out. That guy is an a-hole, by the way. I decided to check out the live action Grave of the Fireflies. And I think there's a truth that, I believe it was Roger Ebert who addressed that the reason this film works so well in animation is because you can apply any person you know to those children. They're just drawn vaguely childlike and human enough that you can swap out anybody within reason to those kids, and it makes it that much more palpable and effective. And while watching the live action version, I understood what he meant for the first time, because when you're watching two real children, you are seeing the artificial nature of trying to get young child actors to act, and the believability weirdly is lessened. It's no less sad, no less grief-inducing, but it is a vastly inferior film to this one, which I think is perfect in every way. Its presentation of color, its use of animation technique, its score, its vibrancy of life when life is imbued within these kids, and the lack of it when it's not. You don't get that in the live action one the same way. It's drab, it's kind of gritty. You can tell that they're on sets or manufactured sets for the landscape that they've chosen to photograph in and whatnot. It's not as effective. But yeah, so if you're given an opportunity to watch the live action one, don't waste your time. If you're spending time on Grave of the Fireflies, watch this version. It is a pure cinematic treasure and one of the hardest films you'll ever watch, and if you never watch it again, I'll fully understand why. But at the same time, I have so much love for every aspect of this film. This is truly one of only 5 or 10 films I can think of no negatives for. And because of that, I do like to revisit it from time to time. Probably won't do it while I have children living with me in the house, because that, right after the movie ended, I was like, I need to hug my child. I need to do it. She was sleeping, and I was like, I don't care, I'm gonna wake her up. This happens. And I just needed to hold on to the kiddos. But yeah, we will visit a film that is substantially less heavy next week. I believe next week is Kiki's Delivery Service, which I think is one of the best of the Ghibli lineup as well. The magic he tapped into, these two filmmakers tapped into, Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki, in the late 80s was just a stretch of pure magic. Between Castle in the Sky, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, then My Neighbor Totoro, which developed the Studio Ghibli to what it is today, or at least got it on the track to what it is today. This film, which is showered with prestige, as it should be, because this is one of the strongest pieces of art, full stop, regardless of animation. This is of film in general. And then Kiki's Delivery Service, a film that I will also shower with a lot of praise. These two filmmakers really tapped into a unique aspect in animation that's every bit as good as the early Pixar days or early Walt Disney days. It is cinematic treasure at its finest. So we'll discuss that more next week. I look forward to it. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace!